Hello, everybody. My name is Chris Samuel. I am a writer for So.com, and I'm interviewing P. Frank Williams, the creator of the new series on WeTV, Hip Hop Homicides. How you doing today, sir?
I'm doing fantastic, my friend. Thanks for talking with me. And I'm executive producer, 50 Cent, Mona Scott, Vanessa Sadden, creators. I'm just the showrunner, executive producer. So don't want to have nobody, shooting shots at me.
Okay. All right. First question I would have for you today is, how did this idea come about to make a show or of a topic or a problem like this with the recent shootings, or well, not with shootings in terms of the duration of hip hop?
Well, this show came about sort of because 50 Cent was very close to Pop Smoke. Pop Smoke was killed a couple of years ago. Was like a mentee for 50, and 50 himself obviously has been shot and is a gunshot survivor, and so he knows what it's like to actually go through this and survive. I think when Pop died, it really shocked 50, and I think he had some suspicions about how it happened and who did what, and so that inspired him. Like, we needed to do a show about talking about some of these murders and these deaths. And him and Mona got together along with Vanessa Satin from Double XL, and it was born. And I came in as a producer and went out and shot it all over the country with Van and every city, and put it together. So it was a labor of love. But yes, the genesis came from 50 Cent.
So you would say his relationship, or him looking at himself and seeing his self and Pop Smoke, was the inspiration for him to want to be the executive producer for the show?
Correct. He was very close to Pop. Pop went to him for advice. If you look at the episode which premiered last night, you could see where 50 saw a lot, even looks like it to some extent. So I think 50 saw himself in that situation and was shocked. This kid was only 20 years old, had barely started to go. So he was like, we needed to talk about this and do something about this. So yes, unfortunately, and then obviously the more recent deaths and stuff like that only made it worse, and just like drilled in the reality of the need for a show like this.
Outside of Pop Smoke, what do you think was yours and Mona's and 50's overall vision for the show in terms of what you want the audience to learn about these cases?
Our goal was to definitely show three-dimensional portraits of these young men. As I keep saying, humanize them, because a lot of time mainstream media outlets like that don't show them as fathers, as sons, as husbands, as boyfriends, as members of their communities, and shine light on who they really were when they just talk about the environments and the music as offensive or misogynistic or whatever. So our goal, coming from the hip hop community, which we all really come from, and obviously if you know about my background, I've been doing it for a minute and holding up the light. And so I just wanted to make sure that when you think of Pop Smoke, you think about his mother. When you think of XXXTentacion, you talk about his mental health stuff that he did, the positive stuff, you know what I mean? When you talk about a Mo 3, the gospel music, that was a part of his legacy and his vibe. So we wanted to, as insiders, one thing I'll say as a person who came from the source and some other backgrounds in the 90s, we were trying to give you an inside out look at the hip hop murders and stuff like that, meaning we're coming from inside the culture back out to the world. And a lot of time outside the world looks into the culture. So that was important for me that we did that. You know what I mean?
Yes, and you referenced the source. Now, of course, the two notable hip hop murders were, of course, Tupac and Biggie back in the day. Of course, me not being there, but what was your thought process when you saw those two like heavyweights pass away in like a 6-month span? And did you think there was any way possible it would be like a recurring cycle with like big name rappers like being shot and killed?
Yeah, I mean, it's really tragic. And I'm sure, as you know, I covered Biggie and Tupac in real life, and the source covers from 95 about Eazy-E, and then Tupac in 96. I wrote those covers. Like, I was there at the hospital, 97, Biggie's murder, and then produced a lot of TV shows, Who Killed Tupac, and all of that kind of stuff on A&E. And so I was very close to that situation, and it was very troubling, to see that and what it did to the hip hop nation and all the things that happened. Death Row, Bad Boys, so many things happened because of that, and a lot of death. And I was hopeful that I wouldn't be here in 2022 doing the same thing, same kind of topics, but I think to some extent the streets and hip hop have always been together. So you can't say that necessarily is something new. But I will say the young man that killed Tupac, Orlando Anderson, had a personal problem with Tupac. Whoever did that to Biggie, there was beef between Cancer whatever. Today, P&B Rock, a random guy came up and shot him in the middle of a restaurant. Pop Smoke, some random dude saw something on the internet. I think there's a clout chasing and a sort of a social media part today that's far different than when I was doing the 90s with Tupac and Biggie. So to me, it's worse. And I think that we got to do some really internal housekeeping as artists and as also people in the culture. We can blame white America and white media, the record companies, all we want, but they don't force us to, sip lean and, drink this and that and write these crazy lyrics. You know what I mean? So that's with us first. So that's, I'm just saying, for me, looking at the Tupac Biggie thing, so now it is crazy to have to do that, but I think that we got to try to fix it as best we can.
Yeah, that leads into one of my questions was like, is it like the music itself, or is it more outside factors that determines, whether it's being promoted or being celebrated or rappers getting gunned down? Of course, people, especially politicians, want to use, we wrote about this on but like rap lyrics being used in court, or of course them saying that drill music needs to be outlawed or cut down, especially places like New York City. What do you think outside of the music itself is like a factor that can lead to too much violence within rappers and like the Black community outside of music?
Well, I think I would say it's this. It's a lot of different things to me that go into what people rap about and things that happen to them. Like Tupac wrote, I see death around the corner. You keep writing death around the corner, or I wonder if I die tonight. Something's probably going to happen if you write about shooting people up, and people are going to try to challenge you on that nowadays. So, but the issue I think is systemic as well. Meaning, for example, one of the episodes in the Hip Hop Homicides, we went back to O Block. King Von is a rapper from Chicago who got killed in Atlanta. He got in a beef in a parking lot. I'm sure you've seen the video where he punches a guy and then they end up shooting him. When we went back to Chicago to Parkway Gardens, aka O Block, one of the guys there, a pastor, was talking about the young kids, mentioned that by 14 or 15, if you don't get some of these kids from the street, they're gone, right? If you don't capture them, there's whatever. King Von talked about if you step outside, then you're in it. So that means that our communities and the environments that these young men grew up in is already that way. FBG Duck or, Pop Smoke growing up in Canarsie with those gang members or whatever. So our communities create these things, and these guys only tell the stories of what they see and know. So sometimes you got to change the environment and paint a different picture. But you also, as an artist, but if all you know is rapping about streets and drugs, and that's what you grew up in, and sipping lean, and once you get a little bit of money, you're probably going to go crazy too. So you know what I mean? So I think that I'm not one to be totally judgmental back on the artist, but I do think that the record companies and people who profit, it's almost like the more gangster you keep it, the more drugs you talk about, the better they're happy, because they think that's all people want to listen to. And it's also on the fans. It's on us as the people who take in the culture to be like, no, I'm not going to get another WAP or 10 more songs about, sipping on some scissor or whatever. We got to try to balance it. So, I mean, I think you can't point the finger at one thing is what I'm trying to say. I think it's the people making the music, people selling the music, us consuming the music. We're all a part of it, you know what I mean? And so I think we got to change the image of what's cool or what's acceptable from an artist, especially in hip hop. Because the more gang shit you talk, the more guns you talk about, the more big booties, it seems what people want to listen to,
Yeah, like one argument that a lot of people push, especially from what you want to call like old heads, is like it's too much. They say it's too much whack stuff or too much low vibrational stuff. I mean, they make it clear there was whack stuff or too much destructive music like back in the 90s, but it wasn't promoted like some of the stuff is now. Like the Nas's, the Biggies, the Tupacs, the Snoops, the NWAs, those were pushed because it was actually good, or it might give you a message and whatnot. And they say Black music or hip hop used to be.
It just feels like there's not enough balance today.
Yeah, not enough balance.
The gunplay, the drugs using kind of music. I'm doing a piece called, for a network, talking about how it used to be, you wanted to be the drug dealer. Now you are the drug user. Right? So that's a different celebration. And I think, in terms of sex, MC Lyte or Queen Latifah, there was variety, and you had Foxy. So you didn't have just the Nicki Minaj, Lotto, Megan's booty, sex, Cardi rap. So I just want to make sure there's balance, brother. And I think that that's going to continue to be the best. Nobody is trying to make you say, be Rhapsody. You ain't got to be KRS-One with a message, but just some balance would be nice.
Yeah, I feel that is a lack, in terms of balance, and also with you have like the good Van Lathan who was going to be on the show and talking to people. Did you feel like you and 50 and Mona, did you feel like he was the best one for the show? And if not, were there what other Black journalists were you looking at to do the show?
Well, when I got involved, they had been kind of hatching the idea. The show was almost close to being bought or just was, on that thing. And so I just helped develop it. But Van was already attached. And when I spoke to 50 about it, we talked about it. I was like, that was a really great choice because I think Van has currency within the community and people trust him. Obviously, the situation with Kanye, where he called Kanye out, was a pivotal moment. And Van and I had worked together at TMZ. I had worked at TMZ, and that's how I met Van. So I think it was a perfect synergy between someone he already knew to be the showrunner, executive producer, and then as the voice. I think he has a good conscience, and I think that people trust that he's there for a real reason, that he's not out to exploit the culture. So I think us going on the road, New Orleans, Chicago, Florida, Texas, all of the places we went to shoot those shows, he talked to the people and not at them. And I think that's a key thing in our communities. And I think there's a lot of mistrust from people, from law enforcement. And Van, I think, was able to bridge that gap. So yes, I think he was a really great choice, and handpicked by 50 and Mona, by the way. So.
And you also speak about a comfort factor in terms of that. Which what do you think is something that the viewers will feel like will learn from the show outside of the murders? Like, what do you think people will be surprised to hear after watching the show?
Well, again, I think the number one thing is to humanize them. Fascinating things about people that you didn't know, or the fact that, for instance, it sounds kind of funny, but I remember laughing when we were interviewing Mia X in New Orleans about Soldier Slim. And Soldier Slim is a rapper from New Orleans. Slow motion for me. He was murdered in New Orleans on the front yard of his mother's house, and we talked about that and got to know his history. But Mia X was like, Soldier Slim liked to read books. They had the Book of the Month Club. He would read books, right? And you wouldn't think that Soldier Slim with the gold teeth and the gangster is reading books because he was a nerd and he loved to read. So I just was trying my best to make sure that we saw them beyond what you thought about. Mo3 grew up in the church, was extremely religious, wanted to be a preacher. Unfortunately, hip hop killed him, but you wouldn't have known that he really wanted to be a preacher until I told you that, because you probably just heard about some of the negatives. So I think we wanted to shape the portraits and also, give new information. In the case of King Von, we were able to interview his sisters, and people didn't know his sister was there the night the shooting took place. And within that episode, she makes a startling, revelation that she saw police potentially shooting somebody. So we also gave new information, but we also tried to give you facts or tidbits about the people and the artists that you don't know that either could surprise you or something like that. So I think that as journalists of color, we got to access that police probably usually don't get, because there's more trust. Ben Crump and I did a show called Who Killed Tupac on A&E, and because of people's trust for Ben as a Black America's lawyer and me as a journalist or different people, we got to go places and talk to people who the police never would have been able to do and get things that they don't. So that's what I'm hoping that the show will do, is peel back those layers, both personal and from an investigation standpoint.
Now, I don't know whether or not if you are a fan of the TV show The Boondocks, but of course they had an episode on snitching. Now, for some of the cases where, well, most of the cases where there haven't been solved, was there any unwillingness, or were there people that you reached out to where they did not want anybody, or they didn't want to talk to you or Van at all, like people who just pushed back and didn't want to be talked to about a certain
for sure. I think there's people, especially in the New Orleans situation with Soldier Slim and Magnolia Shorty, where there's active and some of the killer may still be alive and on the streets, and they're like, I don't want to touch that. A, out of fear for their lives, and B, because of that's not what they do. That's not how you don't talk about it. That's just the code of the streets. Situations, King Von, we try to reach out to Lil Durk and other members and try to people who we know were a part of the situation, and they don't want to touch that, right? They don't want to touch the murder and kill, and you know what I mean? They may not want to get on that. Some police didn't want to talk because some of them are open cases, and some officers who might have known something don't want to get out in public. It's a touchy touchy thing, but I think that if you see somebody get murdered in your neighborhood and you know the guy that did it or the person and whatever, and you know that person's family and maybe they didn't deserve it or whatever happened, would you want them to do that same thing if that was you? Would you want them to say, hey, I saw something, that killed this man and it was such and such, or do you not snitch or you just let it go? What if that was you? So I think that to me, I'm always just trying to think about our communities. We're so worried about that, but the goal is to make sure we don't kill each other and don't have to be snitching. You know what I mean?
All right. Last question I would have is with this one turned to be a pretty interesting show. Is there any projects with you and 50 in the future? And if there are, what would the subject or topic be?
I mean, you never know. We're obviously always talking. I'm hoping that this show does well. And I think once we get to the end of the year, we'll circle back. But yeah, I mean, I got other projects that I'm doing. One with Busta Rhymes that's coming out next year. And another one about Roger Troutman. That's really cool as well. So always working, you know what I mean? Just trying to make sure we tell these stories. And I think, hopefully at some point, maybe there's another season of Hip Hop Homicides on the way, because unfortunately there is a rash of shootings and stuff like this. And, it's not something I necessarily want to do, but we could do 100 episodes, unfortunately, because of the amount of young people, men and women, who've been shot and killed, especially over the last few years. One thing I will say as we end the interview is that, I'm hopeful that the internet generation and the clout chasing and the guns and all of that shit that's being flashed and putting videos up of murder and whatever. I hope we got to check ourselves. Like I don't, walking in the middle of Roscoe's in the middle of the day and killing P&B Rock. That's just, if you was in the hood, they'd be like, no, you can't do that. There was rules. You understand? We got to get some rules back to this because it's out of control, my brother. It's out of control. And I'm prayerful that, hopefully our show will show something positive and change the game.
And I'd hate to sound like a pastor, but just one more thing. Will Takeoff be added, or is that just too late?
That's just too fresh. We were trying to do Young Dolph. I think I'm forgetting on the kid in Florida. Murder on My Mind. Wyan Melly, his case hadn't done. So some cases we still got to get a little distance, and that's way too fresh. Maybe next year, but it's just. Just even thinking about it right now, even though I went through this experience of doing this show, and there was a lot of trauma that these people have that they downloaded on us because they're telling us their stories. And there's a lot of trauma in this. And this is just, it feels like the trauma gets worse, right? Like there's a collective grief in hip hop right now. We're like, don't know what to do. And so we're going to continue to do the show, but I'm hopeful that we get some counseling as a culture because we need it, very much so.
Yeah, so I think, pretty productive conversation. I wish the show success, Mr. P. Frank. And that concludes our interview with So.com. I'm Chris Samuel.
All right, Chris. Peace.
All right.